Hello, BookTube. So this is book talk. I've not done book talks for quite a while now, but in this video, we are going to discuss Ripples and Other Stories by Shih-Li Kow. So today I have with me Shannon from That's So Po. She has read this book and she said that she liked the book. And yeah, I'm gonna pass the time to Shannon to just sort of introduce herself and talk about her channel.
Hi, I'm Shannon. My channel is That's So Po. And I read kind of eclectically. I read a lot of different genres, a lot of different age groups. I do read a lot of SFF, but I get some really great kind of contemporary literary fiction type recommendations from Freddie, including for Shih-Li Kow's works. And so previously he had done a great review of the Sum of Our Follies, which prompted me to get my hands on that. And I loved that one. And so then I also wanted to read her other work, which is Ripples, the short story collection. And I loved it just as much. And we had such a fun time chatting about it between ourselves that we thought, let's just do a video about it.
So thank you so much for joining this video discussion with me. And yeah, before I continue, I just want to say that Shannon's channel is really awesome. Many of the things that she reads are kind of different from what I usually read. So I tend to get like really different recommendations that are kind of different from what I usually read, which I think is really valuable, especially since I kind of just want to expand the types of books that I want to read. So yeah, do check her channel out. It's really cool. It's really awesome. Anyway, let's just kind of talk about this book. So I'm just gonna put it out there, really general question. What do you think about this book?
I think that Shih-Li Kow deserves so many more readers than she's getting. I think, because she's being published by Silverfish Books. Yeah, Silverfish
Silverfish,
Books.
yeah.
Yeah, which is like this small Malaysian press. I think that it doesn't seem like her books have been optioned to be printed and published by US or UK publishers. And so I think a lot of people aren't reading this, but it's like quality work. It's so good. It's so funny. She's got like this style of humor that I really like, where it's not over the top silliness or anything like that. It's much
Yeah.
more just absurd situations and people being ridiculous and just a lot of social commentary, a lot of things that really speak to the experience of women, especially. Like she's got a
Yes.
lot of stuff that really talks about women. She's got a lot of things that examine kind of issues of culture and race and class and all of these sorts of things. And all of her stories just make you feel like you're in like the town that it's in. She makes you feel like you belong to that town and you know the people in that town and you understand them as your neighbors and your coworkers and these sorts of things. And so you just feel so embedded in her stories, and it's awesome. I think it's so great.
Yeah, agree so much with everything that you said about her work. Um, I personally really like humor that is based on, like you said, ridiculous things, absurd things. And as a Malaysian myself, I think that many of the things she highlights, it really mirrors what happens in real life, which are essentially kind of stupid, sometimes really absurd. The kinds of things that makes you want to roll your eyes, and it happens on so many levels, like you on political situations, social situations. Those things really happen here, and the characters that she explore in her book, they are so diverse. You don't just expect a characters that come from the same background, same ethnic or economical background. You get people of just all sorts of background, even non-Malaysians, foreigners become main characters in her work. So I think it's really cool that she is able to just kind of write stories from the point of view of so many different people, and that's one of the things that I really like about her work.
And
Unfortunately, she only has like two books.
and I think it's not just like different types of people, but it's also just she writes things from children's perspectives and
Yes.
like the elderly. She writes men, she writes women. Like it's like the whole of society is encapsulated in the stuff that she writes. And it feels like you've got all of these people with foibles, right? So they've all
Yes.
got their kind of unique issues, but they all feel like people and not caricatures in a sense. Like it just
Yeah.
you just relate to them, and even as they're having issues or making some weird choices, like you relate to what's driving them. So it feels really relatable.
So do you want to start with talking about one story that you really, really like in this book?
Yeah, so my favorite story in the whole collection was hard to choose because I like so many of them, but my favorite one was Deep Fried Devils because it was hilarious. And I really like her humor style, so that one just super spoke to me. Um, it's basically about some people who run food stalls. And there's a woman who's running a food stall, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think she is like, is she Chinese?
Yeah, she's
Yeah.
Chinese.
She's but like Chinese, but has like lived in Malaysia and maybe is generationally has lived in Malaysia for some time type of thing. And she's got a Chinese food stall, and across the street from her is more like a Malay, I think.
Malay
Yeah,
couple,
a
yeah.
Malay couple who are selling some food items that are the same, like that are Chinese food items. And she's getting really upset, and she's just like, that's not fair. They can't steal our food. They can't do this stuff. And everybody that who comes to her food stall, she starts ranting about the couple across the way. And it's just like all of this stuff about, I think, a lot of issues of cultural appropriation, but also things about just the way that different groups interact with each other, and all her being a little bit kind of a petty person who's just like, no, they're stealing my business. But it's really funny just the way that she snipes about it, and everybody who comes to buy food from her, and how they have those conversations. And you also get glimpses into the minds of the other people who are interacting with her and the people across from her. And it's just like, I thought it was so great to take this really small little snippet of life, and explore all of those issues, but in a very, very funny way. So that one was just so great.
Yeah, I think that one is just like a bit absurd, but at the same time, I feel that it's quite realistic because racial relation in Malaysia is something that is somewhat tense, but at the same time, it's somewhat contradictory because for some people they can just kind of get along really well. In fact, I must say that for the majority of people, they can get along quite well with one another. But at the same time, maybe some of them behind closed doors, they would kind of just complain about one another, about just some stupid things that the other group will be doing. And this is kind of like a really nice example of that. This story, it's really humorous. It doesn't really show the tension in this like uh, serious way, and it uses this food as the main item that they are just kind of fighting about. So I'm not sure if you have seen how deep fried devils are like. Uh, Not sure if you could just kind of, yeah, if you have like Googled the images or something.
No, I didn't realize that was a food item. Somehow I glossed over that part.
Yeah, so I think I'm just kind of gonna show the photo of deep fried devils in this video. Um, anyway, deep fried devils are just kind of like this really simple snacking item that is literally just made of kneaded dough, and then the dough is kind of like shaped into this long, kind of like elongated shape, and then deep fried in oil, and that's it. So it's a really, really simple food item. Anyone can do it, but it originates from the Chinese culture, I think. So that's pretty much deep fried devils and the things that they're kind of fighting about, like how the Malay couple is appropriating the Chinese food. And I think it also mentions that the Malay couple, they also kind of provided a counter argument of sorts, like how the Chinese people are appropriating their food as well, like giving their twist on it. And it it's sort of like really ridiculous. It's kind of stupid, to be honest. At the end, it's something that you can just eat.
And I really like how a lot of the people who shop at their stalls don't really care. They're just kind of like, yeah, 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 you're sniping, whatever. I just want food. And it's just this, I don't know. It feels like you could know people, like maybe, somebody who you're friends with who's sniping about somebody at work. Like it just feels like this is such a relatable kind of thing, while also talking specifically about some of those racial tensions in Malaysia. It was so much fun.
Yeah, I certainly feel that that's really humorous as well. Like everyone else is just kind of like, okay, whatever. I just want to buy my food. I just want to eat. That's it. And I'm not sure if you've noticed as well in this story, nearby these stalls, there's actually a restaurant,
Hmm.
an Indian Muslim restaurant. So I don't know. For me, that feels kind of like a neutral ground
Hmm.
when you see like these two stalls just kind of fighting with one another, and then you have this like Indian Muslim restaurant at the side where people just sort of get their drinks because these stalls do not provide drinks. And this restaurant is actually going to be like a common motif in some other stories as well. Uh, the same restaurant, and I'm not sure if ShihLi Kow actually mentions it in here, but Indian Muslim restaurant, these kinds of restaurant, they're called mamak restaurants. And mamak restaurants is kind of like a very common motif in Malaysian culture, especially in the Peninsula Malaysia. It is kind of like this place where you would see people from different races. They just kind of go there and hang out. And they usually open like really late. Some of them would open like 24 hours. And people just kind of go there and hang out with one another and eat, and that's pretty much it. So it's kind of like this representation of the Malaysian culture as well, which I think is kind of interesting. It keeps on popping up in some of the stories as well in this book.
And I think also just there's a number of other stories where there are Indian characters who are somehow more neutral. Like they're kind of the safe ground almost in some of her stories. So that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that before.
Yeah, there are a few stories that has the Indian characters. I think one of the stories that you said you want to talk about later has the Indian character as the main character, right?
Which one?
I think it is My Mother's Shadow.
Oh, I did not even notice that. I was so My Mother's Shadow, I was so concentrating on kind of the family dynamic that I didn't even
Yes.
realize like, oh, that's very interesting. Was the husband Indian or
I
was the
think it's
wife?
the wife. The wife is
Okay.
the one in a different story. So this is kind of like a
Yeah.
digressing. In the
Yeah.
different story, the wife's mom was killed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it sort of blends into a totally different story that has some sort of supernatural element in it.
Yeah.
But we're gonna focus on this story first.
Yeah. And a lot of these stories, basically all of the stories in a sense, are interconnected in that they're
Yes.
all of people in a community. And so you'll see little pieces of that community, or you'll see other aspects of those people from a different perspective in different stories. So it's hard to like 100% separate all the stories since they do reappear. But yeah. How about you? What story do you want to talk about? What was your favorite?
So I since we kind of started with Deep Fried Devils and we talked about racial relations, I just kind of want to highlight there's another story that has that deals with racial relations. It's called Private Tuition. So this story it's also about the relations between the Chinese and the Malay, but the main part of the story actually takes place in the past, sometime in 1969. This is where the a very historic event in Malaysia, the May 13 riot, happened. So this is kind of like the main point of the story. This particular story does not really have a a plot. Basically, it's just it starts with the main character's father visiting the funeral of his former tuition teacher, and the main characters sort of just wonder why the father would do that, like what are their relations and all that. And at home, the father just talks about how this private tuition teacher, his teacher, used to help him during his time of need. Uh, on that particular day, on May 13, 1969. So, for those of you who are not familiar with this one, this is actually the time when there is a sectarian violence erupting after a particularly contentious election result in Kuala Lumpur came out, and the Chinese and the Malays, the extremists, both from both groups, they just kind of start provoking each other, and it kind of turns into this bloodbath that happened for like a few days.
Yeah, that story was violent. It's interesting because when we read the Sum of Our Follies, like that one has a lot of lightheartedness,
Yes.
even though it tackles some deeper issues. But these stories had some darkness. Like there's a lot of content warnings, and that one in particular had a lot of violence. And it reminds me of some stories I've read about like the partition in India and just how violent that got, and just that kind of sectarian violence. It was intense.
Yeah, it has plenty of gore. So if you read a totally different book, there's actually another Malaysian book that I just read. It's called The Weight of Our Sky by Hanna Alkaf. That one is actually a YA book. So I'm not sure if the label YA is going to turn some people off. But I think that that book was really well written. It really shows like the kinds of violence that happened at that time, but it doesn't go into this preachy mode about the violence. And what I find really interesting is that that book just highlights violence, but from the point of view of someone who is young and preoccupied with how she is really young. But then again, I digress to that book. But if you are interested to kind of know more about that history, other than Googling about it, you can just check out The Weight of Our Sky, which I think is a really, really awesome novel.
Actually, right after you talked about it, I saw on my Libby app that my library was highlighting that book in particular for Mental Health Awareness Month because the main character
Yeah,
has OCD. And so I thought
yes.
that was so fascinating. Just coincidences.
Yeah, I happened to read it in May, which kind of like coincides with the Mental Health Month as well. So, yeah, I think that was really cool. Anyway, talking about the kind of darker part of this collection, you also mentioned before that you found so many things to be super, super dark. While I was reading it, I thought, I was able to just kind of gloss through all of that. Maybe I was desensitized, I don't know. But after you mentioned it, I realized, yeah, there were so many things that was really dark. There were many deaths, gore, especially violence. Suicide is also
A
it
lot of
also happens.
suicide.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and what else? You also have abuse,
Yes.
domestic abuse, sexual abuse, child abuse. It is so dark.
Although I will say, and this is something I always pay attention to when I'm looking at books that have that kind of heavy content, is like who is it centering? Who is the story centering? And almost always these stories are centering the person who is um, the vulnerable one, the person who is being harmed. Sometimes you'll get multiple stories following different characters, and you'll sometimes
Yeah.
get the person who's more of the harmer as well as the person who is being harmed, or you'll get some sort of outside perspective and realizing that. But I feel like it's not at all voyeuristic. It's
Yes.
more like exploring those experiences. And so I really liked it. Like, so we talked briefly before, but let's come back to it now. My Mother's Shadow. Like that one, I thought that one's not so dark in terms of like violence or gore, but dark in just terms of the themes. Like it was heart wrenching. It's about a family, and it's told from the perspective of a daughter.
Yes.
And she's watching her mother as her mother goes through all of these kind of household chores and cooking and things like that. And her mother's trying to have a conversation with her dad where the mom really wants to go back into the workforce. Like she wants something more out of life. And that conversation was just so heartbreaking to watch, just the way that the mother really felt her kind of soul being crushed by being this stay-at-home mom, and the way that it was just, I think that there's a lot of people who get into these situations where they can't really find fulfillment. And it's not necessarily that they don't see the value in what they're doing, but they just can't find fulfillment. And it was just really, I thought, very feminist, even just very moving. I really liked it. And it had a supernatural element to it. I always like it when the supernatural is used to almost embody internal struggle, and so I just thought
Yeah.
it was so well done.
So I think the way that you talk about this story, I can see it talks about different kinds of issues. One is that it talks about the issues related to women and what they what they decide to do for themselves, how they want to control their life. And on the other hand, we also see the issues of just the sort of, I don't know, the ennui of daily life
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah.
how people just sort of find, or at least try to find, meaning or satisfaction on what they do in life. And sometimes things just get sort of, uh, it doesn't work out for them. And so they end up getting the short end of the stick, or things just get really bland and boredom just kind of takes over. So I think first of all, I just want to talk about the women's issues that you highlighted in this book. Uh, there is actually another story that also relates to women's issues, and also not so much women's issues, but more like a woman's identity, and that
Hmm.
is a woman's work. I think that's the story. I think
That one
that
I
is
love
like
too.
really funny.
Yeah.
It's it's weird because basically what happens in this one is you have a sort of like a main character. Actually, I think the main character is alive. It's a maid working for this rich woman's house, and this particular rich woman, she has passed away, and her family is just kind of preparing for her funeral. And one particular afternoon, the rest of the family are gone to run all these errands, and it's only the maid and this corpse in the house. And the maid sort of thought that, yeah, she can just do whatever that she wants now. Everyone else is not around. She wants to sip some wine, try on some shoes, and then this corpse come to life.
It was such a good story. I think that anytime ShihLi Kow starts to use her humor to talk about things, it's just really, really great. It's a really impactful way to do it.
I think that it's just one of those instances where things border on uh, something absurd. Like it starts to become ridiculous, but at the same time, it highlights in this like really tongue-in-cheek fashion that, yeah, this, even though this woman, she's dead, but she sort of just overcomes the death and then talks about the things that has to be done, particularly relating to her funeral. And I think in a somewhat humorous way, it sort of suggests that this woman has autonomy over her body,
Mhm.
and her body is literally dead, but she wakes up. It's like she's able to control her body despite being dead. So I think this part is something that I just kind of realized after a while when I was just ruminating about this story, and it just struck me. It's I'm not sure if that's kind of like the point of it, but it is an element that just pops up in my head.
Yeah. And I mean, there's actually a number of stories I think that talk about sort of people's bodies, bodily autonomy in this collection. I think that's one of the themes. And like you were talking before about the idea of finding meaning in life, and I think a lot of the other stories too show different people trying to find meaning. Like the one about uh, the like secondhand shop where
Yeah.
the woman who's stuck in there in the rain and she's trying to find some meaning, or the old guy who goes for a walk up the hill and his father
Yes.
had always told him you need to just be really hardworking and stuff like that, and he's trying to figure out what his life has meant. So a lot of these stories just really examine that search for meaning, search for purpose. So it's a big theme.
Yeah, you know what? Actually, when you talk about the one with the secondhand shop, I think we didn't plan to talk about that one. But yeah, that one has a really, really, really funny, and
It's so good.
it has a funny twist at the end. It's like someone is pulling my leg.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's actually another story that I just kind of want to talk about, which relates to finding. It's not about so much about finding meaning, and more like to realize that your life is probably in a state of kind of like unsavory state, and you can't really do much about it, and that is night shift blues. And this story really speaks to me because the story takes place in a at a factory manufacturing environment, and I worked at a factory. And I think Shih-Li Kow, based on an article that I've read before, she worked as an industrial engineer for about 11 years. And I believe she kind of has firsthand experience when it comes to the power dynamics that happens between uh, different levels of workers at a manufacturing industry. So basically, what this story is about is just there's this worker who works the night shift, and then the next day, his engineer found out that he has done some mistake while operating the machines. Basically, he leaves an Allen key in the machine, which causes some great damage to the products that they were doing. And I think it also causes damage to the machine itself. And as a result, he has been penalized because of this. His salary is deducted, and he just feels this really strong sense of resentment towards the factory and those people who are supposed to be like his upper management, people who are supposed to support him, and he feels angry and bitter about that. And we see later on in this book, I'm not going to talk about it, but we see how he sort of reacts to that by doing something. So I just think that this one, it really highlights the power imbalance in this book, and especially class related struggles, which I think is also something that pops up quite frequently in this book as well, since we are seeing many stories that also deal with rich people, poor people, and people who are struggling with money, especially, and how they just need to find ways to get money. And I think one of the stories actually has a shrine where people just sort of give their offerings, and then from that they receive money or some sort of luck and things that they want. And yeah, I think it's really poignant for me.
And I think just also there's a lot in here about people who are very much on the lowest social rung. So like the maids and the workers who are from, I'm not sure which countries, like Indonesia. I feel like maybe some of the workers were from Indonesia. And just like,
Yeah, they come from different places in this book.
yeah, and just like the way that they're treated by their families, the way that people dismiss them or don't really consider things from their perspectives, and like all of that, like that kind of class interaction is really prevalent in a lot of this, and just that the unfairness of a lot of it.
Yeah, actually, talking about this one, going back to the first story, that we talked about, Deep Fried Devils, there is actually a twist at the end, which again we're not going to talk about, but it concerns some foreign worker, and they are not just like rich people who migrate from outside Malaysia. They are like uh, maids or manual labor workers. So yeah, something kind of happens in that story, which just kind of turns the whole dynamic. Uh, uh, Makes the whole dynamic like really in a totally different direction, you know.
Yeah, and I think I also liked that a lot of this wasn't just exploring like foreign workers coming to Malaysia, but also Malaysians going to other places. So
Yeah,
another one of my favorite stories was Hangary and Guangzhou, which is a super short little story, but I'm assuming it's a Chinese Malaysian person
yeah,
who
she's Chinese.
goes on a business trip to China, and like feels that disconnect with it as well, because
Yeah,
despite looking Chinese, doesn't really speak the language and is trying to order food but can't really order what they want to order. And then there's some like textures of food in what they get served that they just can't get used to. And that like feeling of this is my heritage and I should feel at home in it, but I'm not. And I think that that is a really interesting one. And I think that I love stories about like diaspora type things, because that's always very complicated, that interaction of cultures and heritages. And I really liked that one.
yeah. So it's really interesting that she highlights how her surname is supposed to originate from that area in Guangzhou, but she feels like there's sort of this connection that has been severed between her and that place. And then later on, we see that character in the same story. She is back in Malaysia.
Yeah.
And it's sort of kind of like this contrast, like how she's eating in that place in Guangzhou and how she's eating at a place in Malaysia, which happens to be the Mama restaurant in Deep Fried Devils.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It was so great. I love how all of these stories tie together, you know. And I think one of the really interesting things as um, is just how much I think the uh, mixture of different histories and cultures in Malaysia makes sense, like in the American context as well. Because, like, a lot of places in the US have so many different people who have immigrated,
Yeah,
and you have all of this mixture, and you have all of this mixing, and all of this, like, racial tensions, and people who are, on one hand, like, trying to just be part of the US, and on the other hand, trying to relate to whatever home culture they have. And I just feel like it was really interesting to me to see how many of those themes were really similar in the stories about a Malaysian town. So I thought that was fascinating, seeing those connections.
in a sense, I really agree with you with that. In a sense, I feel that the stories here, even though they concern themselves so much with how Malaysian it is, but at the same time, they feel very universal. There are so many themes like identity, displacement, themes, also general themes like abuse or women's issues, class issues. They are all just kind of explored in a very Malaysian context, but someone who is outside Malaysia, who has never lived in Malaysia before, can sort of understand how it feels like and relates with whatever situation that they are more familiar with. So that's the wonderful aspect of this book, which I just appreciate very, very much.
Yeah, it was wonderful. It's such a great short story collection. I had such a fun time with it. And I'm really glad that we just happened to read it at the same time so that we could discuss it. And for anybody who is not based in Malaysia, it's not easy to get a hold of ShihLi Kow's books. But if you go to the Silverfish Books website, you can get an ebook from them. I I got her first book, Sum of Our Follies, through Interlibrary Loan in the US, and it took me multiple tries because apparently there's only like a few copies in the entire US. And it's very, very hard to get your hands on. But you can get the ebook copy through their website, so that's what I would recommend.
So, me living in Malaysia, I wouldn't say that it was really difficult, or at least not as difficult as you, into getting hold of the Sum of Our Follies. But I remembered actually trying out a few stores because some of the online stores would say that their copies they have run out of the book. So I just had to like browse a few websites. It didn't take that much effort, but yeah, it's kind of strange because that book is quite difficult to find. Yeah.
But it's such a good book, and I think that's the thing, right? Sometimes there are these amazing books that you're not hearing about simply because they're not they're not published by one of the big international publishers. And so you're not hearing about it, even though it's super good work. And so I'm so glad that you talked about the Sum of Our Follies and introduced me to Shih-Li Kow because she's a great author.
I really hope that she would publish something soon, or eventually in the future. I'm not sure how it's going to be like, but I am really looking forward to the kinds of things that she would write, especially right now. There are so many there are so many materials if you live in Malaysia that you could write about. There are so many weird things happening recently, especially with the pandemic, and how the people and the government are reacting to it. I mean, those are like it's like a gold mine of materials there.
I hope she does. I really hope she does.
So, do you have like any final thoughts on this book?
I think just this is wonderful. I'm so glad that I read it. And I think that this is the sort of thing where, like, if you want to read something that has a lot of humor, but also a lot of really good themes and has this beautiful immersive feel, and just really awesome writing. I think this is such a great collection to pick up. And I just think that it's not getting hype simply because it's a small publisher that people aren't
Yeah.
hearing about, but it really deserves it.
Yeah, I think so too. I really hope that more people know about these books because I think that they're just so wonderfully written. And yeah, they are such amazing books. And I think it's just kind of fun that we are able to just talk about this book, and we read them at about the same time. Anyway, thank you so much for joining this discussion with me about this book. It has been like a great time reading this book and discussing with you, not only through this video discussion, but also from our offline Voxer chat. So I think it has been really enriching, and overall, it's just fun.
Yeah.
It's all about the fun.
Thank you, as always, Freddie.
So yeah, that's it for our book talk on Shih-Li Kow's Ripples and Other Stories. She has also written another book, The Sum of Our Follies, which both of us think that it's really awesome. So I really recommend these books. I think Shannon would recommend these books as well. So that's it for this book talk, and I'll see you again in a different video. So until then, take care. Thanks for watching, and bye.